So welcome, dear participants. It's beautiful to have you with us for the second day of the Martin-Roth-Symposium, especially for this deep dive with Julia Grosse, Editor-in-Chief of Contemporary and Contemporary and America Latina, whose sprint you just saw. And I also like to welcome Nico Daswani, Head of Arts and Culture at World Economic Forum, who will be our first responder. My name is Fabian. I will guide you through the deep dives today. And we are very happy that Julia and Nico are with us. And we'll take time to answer your questions. So just a short note for our audience on how to participate in this deep dive session. If you have a question, there are 3 ways to include them in this discussion. The first one is via direct audio in this webinar. Please click on the raise your hand icon, which you can find in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. As soon as it is your turn, I will call you by name and enable your audio. Please unmute yourself so you can ask your question. As soon as you have asked it, we will turn off your audio again and your video will never be used. If you prefer, you can also ask the question in writing in the chat of this webinar, or you use our online forum at campus.re-publica.com, campus.re-publica.com, if you are following it from a website or via YouTube, and we will include those questions as well. And as we have little time, I would like to ask Nico for his quick reaction on Yvette's and Julia's sprint.
Thank you so much. And hi, Julia. Thank you so much for your talk just earlier with Yvette. You both made so many excellent points across such a wide range of and spectrum of issues. You know, from the validity of the blockbuster shows to museums waking up to racial inequality in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement to as you discussed, the sort of systemic structural exclusion that means that it's still by and large a non-representative group of people who decide what culture is and how it should be produced and how it should be consumed. So I try to channel my inner Martin-Roth when I try to formulate a response here, wondering as I often do, in this case, not just what Martin would say in these times, but also what he might do. Of course, you know, as you know, Martin was a straight talker and a fast doer. And I think Martin may have said that really we have to get hip to the fact that there's really no inherent incentive for those in power to share their power. And this is demonstrated throughout the course of human history, and we've been having these conversations about opening up the museum for decades now. And we've seen change, but it's change that is safe for those in power, because while it inches towards systemic inclusion, it does not do so at the peril of rocking the establishment. But now I feel perhaps there's an opportunity for radical change. So I've been looking at what some private funders have been doing, mainly private foundations. And it's been interesting to see in the past few years, as you may know, the Ford Foundation, for example, now funds all of its programs through the lens of social justice. So if the project does not contribute to social justice in some way, it does not get funded. So social justice really is like the main frame there. And in the wake of the pandemic, there's been this incredible leadership from private funders and public funders for the emergency funding to keep artists and small and large institutions afloat. Of course, including Andreas Gorgon and the German Foreign Office, who sponsored this gathering here. And what's been interesting is some have taken this as an opportunity to fix perennial issues. So I was just reading today, actually, the Mellon Foundation in the United States has now reorganized all its programs and will assess each grant candidate by looking at how their work will contribute to a more just and fair society. And so if a proposal cannot demonstrate that, they don't get money. And so I've been thinking that in the same way that large government bailouts to financial firms and big business come with conditions, you know, they always come with conditions, and some will say not enough conditions, but they come with conditions, for example, for better fiscal responsibility. I think this is a time for us, especially with public money, to look at the cultural institutions when they are getting these emergency subsidies now in this kind of reset and ask simple questions. You know, moving forward, why do we fund you? As a publicly funded institution, how are you contributing to a more just and fair society? How do you demonstrate that? So all of a sudden, we've got this different set of performance indicators, and one may agree or disagree with how much an institution actually is contributing or not to society, but that now becomes the frame for the main conversation of the value of a museum or a cultural institution, a frame that is, more in tune with the times, with the expectation of the public. And I believe that it's when we change the dominant framework of what is considered the norm, essentially, that we can start to create a slightly faster change. I would hope so, because now those who are in power have to demonstrate how their work will contribute to a more just and fair society, and will have to surround themselves with a broader diversity of people and be opening, they'll be opening new committees and be open to doing things in a new way, or else they just don't get funded. And so now they have to be relevant to society in order to survive. And I think that, again, rather than just talking about it, Martin may perhaps have, and I'm reaching here, but I can imagine him trying to create a coalition of governments and foundation officials that aligned along new shared, for lack of a better term, KPIs, key performance indicators, that change what you have to demonstrate in order to get money. Because if we go back to COVID, or if we go back to the world after COVID, essentially with the same power dynamics, this will have been a sort of a tragically missed opportunity to change some of these systemic issues. So thanks again, Julia, and of course, Yvette, for your wonderful contribution. Certainly for me, it was very enlightening to hear you speak and raised a lot of these thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me try to answer your many, or react to your many points, which were super interesting. Maybe first of all, what would have Martin-Roth had said? Yeah, it's a good question, because in a way, just naively looking at his program, for example, what he did at the V&A in the UK, in London, is, I have to say, compared to Germany, so much far ahead, of what, in terms of a program, a museums program, of what we can see, in many German museums, by creating this very, very diverse rhythm of exhibitions, having the David Bowie exhibition, or Alexander McQueen, but at the same time the Vikings. He had this kind of mixture. We would obviously love to go even a step further and say, okay, it's important to, if we talk about, as a museum, for example, including or speaking to the whole of society, you really have to go in a way, especially, in Europe, you have to go the whole, all the way, and have to have a look at who is part of our society, and who do we want to draw in to the museum. Yesterday, one deep dive was talking about the fact that, of course, it means huge research to, first of all, see who is the society we want to draw in. And this is, for example, something which I think museums should start doing, or maybe, as you say, increase the pressure on museums, what they have to do and what they need to come up with. Really do research, and really deep research on what, who is society, and how, if we have the results, how can we really start and reflect in our program what this society wants. And that's why we always come back to ideas of the blockbuster in terms such as mainstream, because obviously, the bigger the topic, the more people you draw into an exhibition. And this, goes always to the next question of quality. Okay, how low do you have to go then? Once you have this, a big, let's name it blockbuster, or big inclusive show which speaks to many people. Yeah. And I think this is something Martin-Roth really was ahead of in Germany anyway, but really, really good at doing this kind of, as I said, rhythm of different formats within, his within the exhibition format. And I think that was quite unique. If I would, and I think this idea of increasing pressure on museums is fantastic. I think it's important as well. You mentioned the Ford Foundation and Mellon Foundation. We ourselves, are part of the freedom of speech program at Ford, for example,
yeah.
and they, as you say, look very closely at what you do and if you really fall into these categories. And that's why we're really happy to be part of this program. But ideally, because this is kind of imposed, or this is something the museums have to do. But ideally, a museum director or a museum itself would realize that it's about time, so that you don't have to, increase the pressure and impose something on them, like programs, etc. But ideally, all museums would, at this moment, I think should feel that they have to do this.
Yeah, could I jump in with a question? Because
yes,
what I really liked about your talk was that Yvette said that museums see it as a trend at the moment. And I wondered how we could change that perception to make it long-lasting and to make it sustainable, this whole change, because I feel there is something changing, and you can see that in institutions as well. How can we make it long-lasting?
Yeah, it's a big question, obviously, but one way, for example, looking at the exhibition programs, which obviously try to open up more, to be more diverse, to get in more global topics or exhibitions focusing on global perspectives, etc. The routine nowadays is always to get in an expert for a season or for one exhibition. You pay them, they do their job, and then off they go. And this is obviously something which doesn't mean change within the institution, because let's say the curatorial staff or infrastructure stays the same, and stays the same, very inclusive group of people, of experts who always get in, the help from, let's say, global experts who come from abroad, but just stay for, the period of 3 months and then go again. So this is something which obviously needs to change in terms of, what you was just mentioning, what Yvette said, to have a more sustainable program, which includes, many voices and positions within the institution, and not only, getting the experts in if you need them and send them home again if you don't need them anymore.
So it's also important for the institutions to change, and also for people to step down actually from their job and from their position. And yes. I would like to know from Nico how the World Economic Forum actually does that change and how it is evolving, and if there are already implications to change the whole procedure.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating time, a tragic time, and a fascinating time, and an important time for us to just, in a way, adopt a beginner's mindset. A lot of the institutions, cultural institutions, even the World Economic Forum, have been successful for 40, 50, 60 years doing what they do. And this pandemic kind of upends a lot of the things that we thought we knew, and a lot of the expertise that we've developed. And so in a way, we have to become more generalists than specialists. And if you're a generalist, I think you have to be a little bit more humble about what it is that you can actually do and what it is that you cannot do, and who you then need to reach out to be able to build. And I think that the more enlightened leaders are able to see that you inherently need to be more inclusive, not just diverse, but inclusive in how you move forward, because the world is just so complex, the butterfly effect of how one thing connects to another. I mean, just look at the pandemic, right? Something happens in a market in Wuhan, and then look at the world now. So our sort of linear approach to expertise and how our fields develop have to be completely opened up. Otherwise, institutions, cultural institutions, international organizations are not relevant anymore.
But I think inclusive is tricky as well, because, before the inclusion, there was an exclusion. You know what I mean? Because who's including now? If the museums, suddenly realize, oh, we have to include more, this again comes from, a certain position of power who can say we include now. This why I find inclusion always very tricky as well.
Unless there is pressure from the public, from people, and we see this in the social movements, and we've seen the backlash of museums that took a long time and cultural institutions that took a long time to respond to the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, that was a very clear example of the public saying, what is your response? And employees of these places. but also I think the funding, follow the money. I have to say, it becomes key, because when diversity and inclusion is a sort of a one aspect but not part of the core, then it is always something that can be used as a soft power tool, or as a way to show that you are reaching out to the community. But again, those in power don't have any inherent incentive really to open up the power. So it needs to be we need to be in this time. And you said, for example, you said, Julia, or maybe it was Yvette, but one of you talked about the boards and the decision makers, and so some of I know that Ford Foundation and others look at the composition of the boards of the institution.
I have to jump in here very quickly, sorry, because we already are over time. I know it's
what a shame.
Listening to you. Yeah, it's really a shame. I'm glad that you're going to be with us for the last discussion on Friday, Julia, again, to hear more about your opinion. I'm glad that Nico will be with us for the next deep dive as well, who will be with Roxana Omar, whose sprint you already heard. Thank you again for taking the time, Julia, and see you on Friday. And we will have a short break, and then the next deep dive starts.